It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are age 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about a half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly, my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me, as we hadn't been out for too long, and their bags are only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check all their candy, but we didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything, since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kinda regret that decision now. What was that old woman doing, and who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone, since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out, because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over, because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating. So that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 o'clock, almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy, or that we weren't home, so I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole, and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard, and his lips appeared to be very dry and crusty looking. There was no way this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't wearing a costume, and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pockets, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house, or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded, and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off our property. My brother and I had a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. The next day, we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all of this is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted, since her door was wide open. That means he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. My husband Jim and I own an antique business in a big old bizarre barn of a building. It has 5 floors and multiple other tenants, including a restaurant. Halloween was a Monday last year. We locked up the business at 5 p.m. and we went to an early dinner across town. Then we got a call from our security monitoring company at 6:30. A motion detect on the lower level, then another. We left in a tearing hurry, but figured it's a bird or a rat. We don't have rats, but you know, something. It's way too early for a break-in after all. I went inside the main level upstairs and disarmed the alarm, and started fumbling noisily with the keys and the big iron gate, one of many that separate the floors at night. Jim checked the perimeter outside for signs of a break-in. Definitely a bird, or a rat. Dusk was long gone. The shadows settled in and taken over. Only wardrobes loomed in the dark. Wardrobes and nothing more, right? I headed down below the location of the alarm, trusting Jim would follow. I am accustomed to the building after dark, so I just turned on my phone light, not the overheads, and walked around boldly like I own the place. I looked in the corner with the motion detector. Nothing. Just its red eye blinking mindlessly at me. I turned and went the other way while Jim poked around a few aisles over, and there it was, a burglary kit sitting in the middle of the floor, bolt cutters, a fire extinguisher, just sitting there, waiting. I have never gotten a bigger case of sheer terror so fast. After all, there was no broken window or door, so he was still there, in the dark, with me. I hissed, "Jim, Jim, please," and he didn't hear me. I literally couldn't scream, just like in those dreams. Just me, the spotlit burglary tools, and a hostile presence lurking in the dusty shadows while I whispered for someone to save me. Finally, 1,000 years, or maybe 10 seconds later, Jim wondered why I had taken the route in the hallway and came to see me. He saw what I was frozen pointing at, with the "oh fuck" expression on his face. We bolted out the front door to call 911 and wait, and we abandoned the building to the burglar. An eternal 5 minutes later, the police showed up and were initially pretty unimpressed with our find of the crowbar and fire extinguisher, until we pulled up the security footage that revealed the actual horror. The face of my new sleep paralysis demon. So this guy, he is built like a lean, mean brick shithouse. He crouched on a landing behind a bookcase when we closed, and watched me and my staff lock up, bided his time, then calm as could be, he walked out and went to the men's restroom in the hallway downstairs. That area isn't set for motion detect for a variety of reasons. He spent a while in there moving around with the door open. He constructed the mask using one of ours, and a fake flower wreath to hold it on. He looked right into the camera bare-faced, and then put the mask on, and finally put his gloves on. He stacked a few solid body vintage suitcases in front of a tall iron gate and hopped right over it like it was nothing. He ran down the hall, triggering the 6:30 silent alarm. He ran back into the hall and moved a ladder to hop back to the other side of the gate, and bizarrely, just repeat this whole thing a few times. Then he went to the basement, wormed over a 15-inch gap over yet another iron gate. Back to the hall again, staring into the camera more. He kept repeating this, moving fast up and over, back and forth, upstairs and downstairs. Then he got tools out and peeled apart one of our steel lock boxes with a crowbar and stole a handful of our keys to access showcases. At this point, he heard me fumbling with the gate and keys upstairs. He left behind the stolen keys and tools and hid. While watching me, he waited in the dark. When we exited to call 911, he ran back to the basement. In the basement, there is access to a dirt tunnel that circles the perimeter of the building. He broke open the door and entered. Spiders the size of dinner plates live in there. He had no light. It's muddy and musky. It's, in a word, petrifying. There is a tiny exit hatch. If you walk the whole thing and take the multiple turns, that dumps you into the busy kitchen of a restaurant. Whereupon one would need to stroll past the line cooks, out into the restaurant property, which has cameras, and then one could leave their front door, plastered with mud, which leaves many tracks. When we found it, there was this clear entrance into the tunnel, but no exit tracks, no muddy footprints, nobody walking out on the restaurant cameras, and the cooks didn't notice anything. It was a busy night though. Reviewing the footage, timing it all, tracing his path from camera to camera, and searching the building carefully took hours. By the end, all of us including the police were starting to lose our collective cool and freak out. There was no chill when even the guys with guns were rattled. After all, where the f did he go? Jim and the two officers had no choice but to walk the dirt tunnel. They made it about halfway through the tunnel when the cops said that they're just gonna review the footage. Jim got the okay from them to board up both ends of the tunnel, which he did, solidly. Did he indeed crawl out of a hatch in the busy kitchen and stroll out past the cooks? I guess. We got no suspicious smells coming out of the tunnel in later weeks and months, but nobody has walked the far side since.